Hello, everyone at home. Thank you for joining us today. We are here from Dark Horse, and I am joined today by a host of some of our excellent creators who have new books out this June. June is a busy month, and so thank you for bearing with us as we show you a multitude of titles, all of which are available now to pick up at comic shops and bookstores. You can find all of these, as I said, at your local comic shops, bookstores, and online at the usual places to order, but we do encourage you to shop locally if you can. We'll come back to that in a moment. I do want to introduce all of our guests today. I'm especially excited. We didn't know until today, but I'm glad that it has come together. But thank you, Ian Culbard, for joining us today. Ian is the artist on everything. So thank you again, Ian, for joining us. If you'd like to say hello to the folks.
Hello.
So yeah, we had Christopher Cantwell on last week in our new comic book day rundown. He, of course, is the writer on the series Everything, which is on Burger Books. And he also is the writer on The Mask. I pledge allegiance to The Mask. And so last week we had a variety of creators this week trying to coordinate time zones. A lot of these folks here are in the UK. So thank you all of you for joining us, and Willow for joining us as well, who is on the West Coast as we are here at Dark Horse. And so yes, Willow Wilson is she is the writer on Invisible Kingdom. Thank you for joining us, Willow.
Thank you for having me.
And the artist on Invisible Kingdom, same series, Christian Ward. Thank you as well for being here. John Allison on Steeple. And of course, Ram V.
Hello.
Do you prefer to go, do you want to do full last name or just initials today?
Oh, Ram V is fine. Most people
Ram V. Fair enough. So thank you all again for joining us today. Again, new comic book day. A lot of new releases this week, and with delays due to COVID, I know that some have come out already in some comic shops, and some may be a little bit delayed. But please check with your local comic shops. Comic Shop Locator is a great tool to find any shops near you. I do recommend calling them, checking in just to see what their hours are, as not everybody is open quite yet. And then indiebound.org is a tool to help you find local bookstores near you. That is another great source to find all of our graphic novels, which are available through Penguin Random House, so widely distributed through both bookstores and comic shops. One thing I like to ask our guests actually is if you have any local comic shops or bookstores that you would like to shout out right now who are doing curbside pickup or have open hours at this time. So if anybody would like to shout anybody out, please go ahead.
I got page 45 in Nottingham, and they have a mail order system that's been in place for about 10 years, so they're all set for that anyway. But they also have the store is opened on Monday, so yeah, with social distancing measures in place as well.
My local stores are Gosh Comics and Forbidden Planet in London, and both of them, I believe, are offering or have been offering mail order. But I know they opened up as well just a few days ago. So definitely go visit them and pick up books.
Yeah, another vote for Gosh Comics, my old comic store. We don't have a local comic store here, but Gosh Comics gets my vote down in London.
My local shop is a little shop, but they are open again now. It's Chaos City Comics in St Albans, and they're a small business. So if you're in the striking distance, you should get down there and help keep them open.
And my local comic shop is Phoenix Comics and Games in the now famous Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. I think they have been doing curbside pickup since sort of COVID happened. We are not open yet. We're still in phase 1, but I know that they do have some pickup and delivery options for anybody who might be interested.
Excellent. Yes. Capitol Hill is not as chaotic as perhaps the news might have you believe.
No, it's very chill, actually.
Yes, you can go sit in a park and enjoy a hot dog, as I've seen some friends doing.
And garden.
Yes, we are here. Dark Horse, of course, is based in Portland, Oregon. And so we also are not quite open yet, although some neighboring counties are. So again, definitely recommend check comicshoplocator.com or give your local shop a call and just check in and see what their hours and options are. But we do encourage you to, yes, support your local comic shop if you are able to. A few more housekeeping notes before we get into it. Thank you, everybody. I see we already have a bunch of folks in the chat. You are welcome to ask some questions of these creators about the books as we go along. Please feel free to drop those in the chat, and our moderators will be keeping an eye out for those, and we'll get to them as we go along. We also are running a giveaway, and whoever enters the keyword in the chat, all you need to do is enter it once and only once. Use the hashtag or pound symbol, and the keyword is new comics, all one word. So hashtag #, NEWCOMICS, and you'll be entered to win one copy of each book we talk about today. So that includes Everything, Invisible Kingdom, Volume 2. We might throw in Volume 1 too, just, you know, because you got to start at the beginning. And Grafity's Wall, and also Steeple, which are all excellent. And if you haven't read them yet, then you will now have them. And if you have read them, you should give them to your friends so they can enjoy as well. And that is really all we have for the giveaway. It's very simple, once and only once. And with that, let us proceed. So everybody today, we do have a few questions for each of you. I will kind of try to lead off with one of you so we don't all talk over each other, but feel free to jump in and you know, converse with one another as well. Absolutely. So beyond the initial introductions, would you each be able to give us a short description or the elevator pitch, if you will, for your book, just to get us all kind of on the same page? And how about we start with Ian? Can you tell us about Everything?
So Everything's about a store that comes to a town in Michigan called Holland. And it's a department store that opens up in 1980, and it promises to have everything. It's essentially bricks and mortar Amazon in one place, and so it's a threat on local businesses. It's that sort of effect to the local town, but there's also more to it than that, because there's sort of weird kind of effects to local town residents on top of that as well. And it's about consumerism. It's about the world, kind of in a weird way, the world we live in now, effectively, as a result of that. And yeah, that's about it. Have I covered it? Yeah, that's it.
It reminds me a bit of, if you have watched Stranger Things, the latest season with the Starcourt Mall,
yeah,
kind of taking over the town.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's got a very yeah, it's very much rooted in that period of time when consumerism. I mean, the thing I had in, you know, and being able to relate to that was the way that Blockbuster arrived in the UK, for example, because I happened to be working at a family-run video shop at the time when that arrived in our town. So it's very familiar to me, that idea of these big courts opening up.
That's interesting. Chris Cantwell mentioned last week that he also had worked at a video rental shop back in the day.
Yeah.
That's something that no one will ever know about anymore.
Yeah, that is weird.
I have a button that says, be kind, please rewind. And the kids that won't know what that means.
Yeah.
So how about John? Can you tell us more about Steeple?
It's about a young priest. She moves to a remote Cornish coastal town. The first person she meets turns out to be a trainee priestess in the Church of Satan. So the young priest immediately makes friends with a Satanist, and it's kind of about how extreme partisanship is sort of pointless when you actually attempt to operate in the real world. And there's a cast of characters. There's a whole Church of Satan full of refuseniks and people who ain't so good. And then there's also the Church of England, which is quite a rundown organization in this country. And so it's not that popular compared to the Church of Satan, and it deals with the community and the people within it and some nutty scenarios that unfold.
Can you tell us a little bit about the setting for it, the little town where it all takes place?
Well, Cornwall is the most remote English county and the poorest, I believe. And so it relies heavily on tourism. And some of the more remote points, there aren't a huge number of reasons to visit it. And it's that kind of town, you know, it's literally a one-horse town. But these places still have community, and the communities tend to be the strongest thing in those towns. They have to be, otherwise there wouldn't be a town. So it's called Tredregin, and I think Dragon, my girlfriend is Cornish, and so she helps me. She's the cultural sensitivity monitor, and she keeps me on track with like Cornish language matters. And Tredregin, it's kind of, it mixed up the word town and evil. I think it's literally evil town.
I love that. Hence why I had to have you speak about it. Ram, could you tell us a bit more about Grafity's Wall, please?
Yeah, Grafity's Wall is a story of 4 young friends who all come together over one summer and kind of do their growing up in the city of Mumbai. It's about art and artistic ambitions in a city which is both inspiring and oppressive in equal measure when you're not from a very well-to-do family. A lot of it comes from sort of personal experiences growing up in Mumbai, and then a lot of it is also just fictionalized from the experiences of people I know in the city.
And this is a new edition of previously published work, correct?
Yes. So originally we published with a UK publisher called Unbound, which has a story behind it in itself. I had just finished self-publishing my first ever graphic novel called Black Mumba, and my editor at the time had read that and went, I want you to do another thing, which is not the same thing as Black Mumba, but it's still set in Mumbai. And so I went back and I talked to the artist, and it turned out the artist had actually tried to be a graffiti artist, Anand, when he was a kid in Mumbai. And so it just all kind of fell into place and went, yeah, let's tell this story. And so I was over to the States, and I think Connor Knudsen, who's the editor at Dark Horse, saw the book and he went, you know what, let me take this in and talk to our editorial team. And then 2 hours later came back and DM'd me on Twitter, went, yeah, we'd like to pick this up. So that was great.
It's a beautiful new hardcover edition.
Yeah, and it has, you know, back matter and introductions by Kieran Gillen, who's kind of watched me go from my first project to doing these books now. And so it's kind of nice to get his take on what he thinks about the story as well.
Yeah, it's an excellent introduction. I highly recommend this edition. It's beautiful and full of great bonus material like that. Well, and so Christian and Willow, of course, both on Invisible Kingdom. I guess you get to share the elevator pitch / synopsis here.
I'll let Willow.
I think I pitched this to Karen with the words "Space Nun Uprising." Essentially, this book takes place in a solar system kind of on the edge of the galaxy, in which a novice nun in sort of the very interesting space religion that is predominant in that part, and a hard-bitten captain of a delivery vessel both independently uncover a conspiracy between the solar system's largest religion and its largest consumer goods corporation, which in no way, shape, or form resembles Amazon. And so they kind of have to team up and go on the run from forces, both obvious and shadowy, and try to figure out what this information means in a world that has turned kind of ambivalent. So it's fun. It's definitely action oriented. There's some great, cinematic sequences, but it also deals with kind of larger issues about commerce and spirituality and whether you really have the guts to live by your principles. So something for everybody.
Space Nun Uprising. I mean, you really had me at that. So, and Christian, your art definitely is phenomenal for that. I think it really does take those cinematic scenes and gives them that sense of immense, like the vastness of space. It's just gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you.
Which I would be remiss if I did not mention that this has been nominated for several Eisner Awards. Best New Series, Invisible Kingdom, and also Willow as writer and Christian as artist. So congratulations. And
thank you.
Voting closes this week, actually. So if you're in the comics industry, remember to go vote. I'm not telling you what to vote for, but just some suggestions here. Well, thank you everybody for the quick run through on these different titles. I wanted to get into kind of what your process is like working on these books. All of these books are creator owned. So can we talk a little bit about what that process is like, kind of seeing your creator owned work come to life, and what your process is, collaborating with your writer if you're the artist, or vice versa, since we have a good mix today of artists and writers. How about this time, let's go back in reverse and start with Willow and Christian. Can you tell us about your process a bit?
I try to write in such a way that I play to Christian's strengths. Sometimes there can be an adjustment period. I've noticed when it's a new creative team, you're sort of trying to figure out, okay, what does this person like to do? What do they do well? What are they most interested in? And so I'll kind of fine tune certain structural elements and story elements as we go, so that the artist is having fun and making the best showcase of their talent. And obviously, Chris's art style is so unique. It's so bright. He's the only artist I've ever worked with who goes straight to colors. I mean, like, I've never even seen that before. And so having some of these big spreads where you've got whole planets kind of floating in the background, and ships and different landscapes and things moving between those environmental elements is something I try to do to keep it interesting for Chris and interesting for the reader. So I try to remain flexible in terms of what happens and in what way and when, so that I'm not over directing the artist. I know some of the most famous kind of long form scripts that people love to refer to as being kind of mind-blowing and masterful can get very detailed about, like, this has to be a long panel that goes down the side of the page. I try not to do any of that and leave that a little bit more fluid, unless the artist prefers to work that way, so that Chris in this circumstance has say in sort of how the page looks as a whole, as a complete object, rather than trying to over direct.
Yeah, and I love all of that. It's perfect. No, and it's also, I think what's interesting, like comparing working on Invisible Kingdom with Willow to other Crown books like Odyssey with Matt Fraction, is obviously Karen and having Karen's input. And kind of having, so it's almost like it is a creator-owned book, but it's almost like three people rather than two in many ways, and that's been really refreshing. And I've worked with some great editors at Marvel, of course, and working with a great editor is fantastic, because you just want to, I always find when you're doing a comic, you're only working, you've got one person who's the audience, that's the writer. And you're not really thinking about how many people are going to pick up the book and who's going to read it and how they're going to enjoy it. You're really just thinking about how's the writer going to enjoy it, and how am I going to, I think one thing I really like to do is how am I going to surprise the writer and kind of give them their story, but maybe just not quite how they want it, but in a way that they're not going to be like, oh, it's not quite what I wanted, and disappointing, finding a way that's going to be exciting. And that's twofold when you're working with someone as great as Karen and Willow, because you just want to you want to impress and you want them to like it, and because it's something that you're building from the ground up, there's that care and that love, and you're really invested in it. And so it's lovely to hear Willow talking about how she's kind of thinking the same thing from the other angle. And I think that's why with any great creator-owned book, you've got the synergy between all the different people working on it, from Sal the letterer to Richard doing the design work, and Karen and myself and Willow. My ears all enough. So excited it just popped out.
It's good. So that's the enthusiasm we like to see.
Yes. It's pushing out my ears.
Well, it's clearly working quite well on Invisible Kingdom. So thank you, both of you, for giving us this beautiful book and books. As I mentioned, we are in volume 2. That's the new one that's out this month. So each of these collect several issues in one, so you can get volume 1 and 2 now. So how about let's go back to Rom. What was your process like working with your collaborators on Grafity's Wall?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a strange one, this one, because Grafity's Wall is actually Anand's first comic book ever. When I first talked to him, he was a portrait artist in India and a fine artist and a painter, and he really hadn't even considered working on a comic book. But I looked at his work and I said, hey, you know what, you should try to make comics. And he said, yeah, I mean, as long as you're willing to kind of let me know when I'm going off the rails. And so we kind of evolved a process, which is a little bit in between what Willow was talking about, in that my scripts tend to be quite loose. But then I remember, working on this book, I would sit down daily, almost a couple of hours with Anand, and just work on the layouts. And so it was much more like a band kind of getting together for band practice and talking about, like, oh, what if you did this here? And what if you made this panel a bit longer? What if you took this angle instead of this one? And so, I mean, I can genuinely say that the pages there are kind of evolved truly through that kind of collaboration. Whereas, I mean, I also do work at DC and Marvel, where clearly you don't have the kind of opportunity to do that with your artists. So I totally know what it feels like when you're handing in a script and it goes to an artist and they come back and they surprise you with it. But I think there is a unusual quality and authenticity to the work, because it's not quite what I imagined and it's not quite what Anand would have done, but it's somewhere in between the two things. And so it really feels, I think one of the reviews said it felt like it was a book made by a writer artist who had lettered themselves. It didn't feel like a book made by 3 separate people. And I gotta mention Aditya as well, who hand lettered the whole thing, which incidentally was a promise he made after I don't know how many whiskeys at 3 a.m. in a bar in Mumbai, and I held him to it. Hopefully he doesn't regret it, but that's 140 pages of hand-lettered stuff. And again, switching back and forth between Hindi and English and not providing translations. It helps that both Anand and Aditya are from in/around Mumbai, so they know what the book kind of should look and feel like. And so yeah, so my process on most of my creator-owned stuff is I kind of tend to prefer working that way, where my scripts are quite loose, but then I'll sit down for an hour or two and then really go over the layouts and thumbnails with the artist.
Yeah, major shout out, excuse me, to the letterers. They do so much work that I think goes kind of unnoticed, and I'm glad that in this book's case, yeah, he did so much amazing work hand lettering that. So, an excellent call out. Maybe.
And there's a little back matter section where he actually writes an essay about what it was like going backward in time, almost, because he's so used to digital technology, kind of going backward in time and learning again how it was done before digital tools were available. So
Yeah, another shout out to the amazing bonus material in this Graffity's Wall edition. Find it, pick it up. It's really good. So John, you did a lot of the work on Steeple. What was your process like working with your collaborators on this book?
Well, it was the first book I'd drawn, the first monthly book I'd drawn myself for the direct market. So it was a learning process for me. I scripted it as I would script for another artist because it was the first time I'd worked with Daniel Chabon, the editor. So I felt I had to show him that I wasn't just, going to make it up, then hand in something rudimentary at the end of the month, because the process would have been quite far along by that point. So I had to get over that hump first, really, learning how to be an artist for an editor on a monthly basis. And then also, I hadn't had my artwork colored more than a couple of occasions by a colorist. So I also had to learn how to present artwork for an artist, because I usually color myself and I wasn't used to handing artwork over in such a way that I wasn't going to be told off. I mean, my greatest fear is not to be teacher's pet. And if the colorist tells me off, I feel bad. And also, it was lettered by Jim Campbell, who is the letterer on all my books that I've done for Boom. So Jim and I had an understanding, and I think the understanding was that I was going to leave him enough space to put the speech bubbles in. And I think we 100% kept that contract and will remain friends. So the process was really one of trying to do everything correctly, and like a mountain goat, kind of skipping over a slippery mountain, a slippery cliff, because I was scared at every point that I was doing it wrong.
Well,
but it worked out, I think.
And you're kind of continuing Steeple in a web format right now, is that right?
I took the opportunity of lockdown and the kind of shutdown of the industry, really. Like, the books I was working on kind of went quiet, and I thought, well, I've got weeks here. I can promote, earn more teachers' pet points, perhaps get the most pats on the head anyone's ever received. And I did a new story that I ran on the web that kind of follows on from the issues that I did for Dark Horse. I did 42 pages, which I reckon is worth 42 pats on the head.
I think that's entirely fair. And so, Ian, you're the artist on everything. What was your process like working with Chris and with the crew on that?
I think it was like with issue 1, I think I learned the most of working on any book I've ever worked on that one. Just in terms of technically what I was doing. Was the feedback, for one. So that was quite incredible. But it was also, I mean, the process we're working with, say, with Chris, the kind of what you were, Willow, mentioning earlier about too many stage directions and things like that. I would probably ignore most of those and just do my own thing anyway. But it's good to have scripts that aren't like that. And Chris's scripts aren't really like that. They're kind of, they're not specifically detailing, layout structure or anything like that. It's more focused on the dialogue and character building and stuff like that. So, and that's really nice to be able to work with. And with that, it's kind of like he comes from a TV background. I used to come from a TV background, and I used to be a director. And so the way that I work on stuff is that I basically take the script like an actor would. I go through all the lines like an actor would. I look at what kind of an emotion there would be in the scenes, what the through line of the actor might be thinking, and all those sorts of things when I come to do it. And then what I do is I rough out the book really crudely, so it looks like one of my kids did it. And then so it's very rough and woolly. But it's just staging where everything goes on the page, very, very roughly, very quickly. And then I go through and draw one character at a time through the whole book. And so that I kind of stay in character, if that makes sense. So I'll go through the book and I'll just be Laurie for a whole morning. And then I'll be Rick in the afternoon. And I kind of stay with them from panel to panel. And then I come back and I sort of fill bits in. So I never really turn around pages. I don't do things like panel after panel, complete page. I kind of stay focused on one way of working, like focus on character and then focus on background after that to fill in all the places. And then it goes to color after that. So yeah, and it's so when I'm handing him stuff, it's kind of, I do things in big bulks because I don't tend to turn around one page at a time, if that makes sense. I kind of just do I block out a whole area in the book, and it's just more psychologically, it's a trick because it can be daunting drawing comic book pages. So when you come back to a page the next day and you've already drawn 4 or 5 panels on the page, it's like, oh, that's easy. I can just block in the rest of that. So it's kind of like a carrot stick type thing as an artist to get through it. And that's pretty much it. And then when it comes to the coloring process, you know, it's yeah, I don't really have much to say on the coloring. I don't know what you could say about the coloring process. I tend to kind of look at it as cinematically as I can, and yeah, that's about it really.
Fair enough. I think that's a really interesting way to work through it, and that makes a lot of sense, kind of diving into one character and feeling that out as you go along.
More interested in how they act and how they behave in the scene, or you know, what they've got psychologically going on, or what you can use that in a lot of ways to get the reader to relate to certain things as well, because ultimately it's the reader's book when they pick it up and they've bought it, you know. And so you're trying to convey something that they can kind of latch onto. So picking up on those emotions is quite an important part of it, I think.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on something. We have had a couple questions in chat that relate back to this too. People are curious what other jobs you have had, either before or while still working in comics, and was it difficult to balance those separate jobs, or were you able to kind of draw on those experiences and kind of pull that over into working on comics?
I started out because when I went to college and uni, you couldn't do comic book courses. I would have done those, but you couldn't do those. So the closest I could get was animation, because I figured storyboarding's kind of similar. That'll do. And so I went off into film, and a lot of the stuff, and I did that for a number of years. I became a commercials director in the UK for a while. Yeah, and then one day my son was born. My first son was born, and on that day when he was born, I decided to quit this very lucrative, well-paid job and just go into comics, because for some reason that seemed like the right time to do it. Just as there was this hungry mouth to feed in the family, I thought, yeah, I'll just shift over and draw comics for a living. But I'd always wanted to do it before doing film and TV. I really just wanted to draw comic books and work in comic books, because to me, as a medium, it sits in between literature and movies anyway, and it can borrow from both. It's a much more diverse language. It can use tons of stuff to be able to tell a story. It can rob from both of those mediums. So I really wanted to explore that more. You know, it's much more fulfilling and a lot less stressful than TV, basically.
And how about some of our other creators today? Any other job experiences you draw on, or did you find it a challenge to kind of balance 2 careers at once, maybe?
I used to be a school teacher for 10 years. I was the head of my department teaching art, and I always wanted to be a comic book artist. But coming from I come from a place called Wolverhampton. It just wasn't, being a comic book artist was mentioned in the same breath as being a Hollywood actor or a rock star. It just wasn't seen as a real job. So I moved to London, had a go at becoming a commercial artist, and then became a school teacher. But I always loved comics, continued reading them, and then I would use comics as a way of hiding kind of visual literacy and getting kids that weren't engaged in kind of like education to, they think they're drawing superheroes, but what I'm actually teaching them is kind of body proportion and composition. And by doing that, I kind of reignited the passion and started kind of posting comics online. And then I did my first 2 books I did while I was a full-time teacher, and that was awful because you just, you'd have a day job, and like quite a hard day job, and then I'd come home and I'd be working until 2, 3, and then going back to work the next day. I did that for 2.5 years, and then I was just really lucky that me and Matt Faction connected, and that was the thing that saved me. Well, I say saved me. I actually love teaching, but it allowed me to sort of transition off into comics.
Mm-hmm. Do you still teach any classes here and there, like as a side? No.
Oh God, no. I've done my time. No more.
That is entirely fair.
Yes.
Any other?
I studied to be a chemical engineer, and I worked as a chemical engineer for 8 years. I'd always wanted to write. I used to write even as a kid. Comics wasn't. I didn't really think of comics as a sort of place where I could write until I was in the States, and on my 20th birthday, a friend of mine gifted me the first volume of Sandman, and then that blew my mind. And then I fell down this rabbit hole of 80s, 90s vertigo. And by the time I came out on the other side, I was like, yes, of course you can write comics. But I didn't actually start writing until at least professionally until 2013, when I quit being a chemical engineer, because given the obsessive nature of my personality, I knew I couldn't do 2 things at the same time. So I quit, much to the chagrin of my parents. And then I moved to the UK to study writing in 2014. And then 2015 is when I wrote my first graphic novel, kickstarted it, published it in 2016, and it has been mostly comics since then.
I approve of your decision.
I approve of my decision too.
How about you, John? Any past career difficulties or?
Oh, that's all I had was difficulties in my career. I studied journalism at university, and I worked on like the music desk of the university paper while I was there, and I kind of did all the writing that I wanted to do while I was at university. So by the time I got out, I didn't want to do it anymore. So I was good on the computer, and I was quite good with like layout. So I worked as a magazine designer for a year, and then a web designer at a very dysfunctional company. And I learned more from working within a dysfunctional organization than I did about web design, really, because I was not the world's greatest designer. And then I worked in like software design, but all the different places I learned different skills that ultimately I put into the comics. And I was doing the comics that first 5 years that I was working all those like weird broken companies. I'd go home in the evening and just kind of get on with making strips. I couldn't make whole books because everything was piecemeal and I only had so much energy. But the journalism has helped me write to length. The design and all the software I learned let me lay out books when I was self-publishing. I kind of learned about business, weirdly, from working in bad businesses. You kind of learned what not to do as well as what you should do. And I applied everything in comics. You have to apply everything. I mean, many of the best comics writers are kind of polymaths. And so, they're always drinking stuff in. You can't just play video games and watch cartoons. You've kind of got to be doing the hard stuff. I think every writer here knows that you've got to be doing the hard stuff as well as the easy stuff. If you want to make good comics, you've got to go outside comics. So yeah, that was it really. It all kind of developed me into the wreck I was when I was laid off from the last of my bad jobs, sent home to make comics. Unfortunately, after 5 years, I was sort of ready to do it full time.
Yeah, I can relate to that. How about you, Willow? Any past? I mean, you write prose as well.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of my other job, and it really does take different muscles. I found, or at least that's how it feels, to go between prose and comics, because even though they're both storytelling and they both employ the written word, um, the way that you accomplish different parts of a story and the way that you move a story along and the parts that you choose to highlight are really different depending on whether or not you have visual images to go with it or not. And there's also structural issues that you sort of run into when you have to really tighten your story up such that it fits into 20 or 22 pages a month. Whereas in prose, there's a lot more room for digression. But I find that they both they sort of create a balance for me. I feel like a lot of the tools that I've picked up writing comics help a lot with prose, and the reverse is true as well. Although I have to say I think that writing comics has made a greater contribution to my prose than the other way around, because most of what I write in a comic book script is never seen by the reader. It's a love letter to the artist and the letterer, and any sort of marginalia that occurs in there is really only ever going to be seen by those people. Um, Whereas with prose, it's all on the page, and you have to really consider word choice and rhythm and where we sort of naturally stop in our reading patterns. Um, but with comics, you can pack so much in without saying anything. It's God, I'm going to use the biggest cliche in the book, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. But it really is true that you can create a counterpoint in visual imagery that kind of offsets the story that you're trying to tell. You can show in a single image that what this person is saying is not what they're actually doing. Like you can create these wonderful sort of contradictions between what is said and what is done, that really make comics unique. But yeah, it's my poor agent is always on the verge of a heart attack because I am inevitably behind on prose deadlines, because they're not monthly, they're sort of ongoing. So inevitably the monthly deadlines kind of eat into the rest of the time. So I mean, like, I'm sitting here right now and being like, oh my God, I have not written my 1,000 words today. So it's a challenge.
Well, we are getting some more interesting questions from chat. I like this one. Rom, you kind of touched on this with those Vertigo books. For everyone, what are some of your favorite or most influential comics that you have read? Maybe we can start with Rom, since you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comic book that really got me interested in comics as a creator is definitely Sandman, because it was my gateway drug for a second childhood into comics, if you will. Um, and I did approach everything like a child, with a sense of curiosity, and how did they do this? How did he fit all this story in 22 pages? And so that was certainly an influential book, but probably the things that define my writing style the most, interestingly, come from studying books that are done by artists who chose to write for themselves. So I love Dave McKean's work a lot. I love Mike Mignola's work a lot, because you really start learning about when do I need to shut up? When do I need to let the art do the talking? And as Willow was stating, comics is an art form of juxtaposition, which is not something you deal with in prose. And so you really start thinking about, okay, how can I tell one thing through text, one thing through the image, and then how can I make them work together to say something completely different because they're placed next to each other or on top of each other or on the same page as each other. So yeah, so really studying artists or artist writers kind of defined how I think about writing comics now. If that is any kind of answer.
I've got quite a nerdy answer, which is going to upset people who hope that I'm going to say, a specific book. But I was obsessed with periodicals as a child, like the indicia at the front and like bullpen bulletins in the Marvel books. So the book, weirdly, that was most influential on me was Gru, which I think Dark Horse put out quite a few books of Gru. Because it had this huge letters page at the back from Mark Evanier, which would sort of explain the mechanics of how the book was done by he and Sergio, and how everybody's role worked, Tom Luth's job and Stan Sakai's job. And just to get that book every month. And then there would be like 6 pages at the back that sort of took you inside the comics industry as well, from this guy who'd obviously worked with Jack Kirby. I didn't know that at the time. So, and then obviously it was a masterclass of cartooning for like 22 pages. Then you got this kind of masterclass in the nerdier side of the industry at the same time. And I mean, I don't think you can look at my work and see Gru, but at the same time, I genuinely used to say, that's how many panels you put on a page. That's how you fill up the panels. That's how you make sure something's happening on every page and there's a joke on every page. So although my work looks nothing like Gru, weirdly, it's kind of like the acme of a comic book from when I was a teenager and what I wanted to make comic books that were like, just like that, had that sort of punch of content, and you just kept getting more and more and you were always satisfied. You could read the letters page on the way home on the bus and then read the story when you got home.
Letter columns. We do. I actually have some old...
Bring them back.
Yeah, I love a letters column.
Old issues of Grendel that I've been using for some research, because we have a new Grendel series ongoing or coming back soon. And yeah, those letter columns used to span pages.
They were such a point of contact. They kind of kept you knew that there were people out there in an era when you had no idea, especially if you're in the UK, that there were other people out there reading comics. I love letters pages.
Yeah, some of our books still have them, but it is rarer now. So some of our manga actually has it too, like Danganronpa. We get despair mail is what that's called. I like seeing that too. So I don't know, maybe we can bring that back. Maybe that's something.
Speaking of jobs in comics, and I was just thinking about this because my history with Dark Horse is longer than my publication history with Dark Horse. I used to work for part-time at a digital comics publisher in the UK called Panel 9, and my job was like simultaneously the most boring and most amazing job, which is I used to get high-res PDF scans of all of these published stories. And so pretty much all of Hellboy was available to me as high-res PDF scans. And my job was to draw little squares around the panels on those PDFs so that when it went into the app and you were reading on the guided view, that's what you're seeing. Those squares were drawn by me.
Oh, nice.
And I think that informed, again, a lot of my sort of writing and comics came from just reading while you were working. So I must have read like a tremendous amount of comics and gotten paid to do it. So
the dream.
That's a great point. Any other most influential comics or favorites just that you have personally read?
For me, I'd say there's two. Arkham Asylum by Morrison and McKean. I remember reading that when I was at school, and it was the first book I'd seen that wasn't pen and ink. It was everything. And that really blew my mind. And that always stayed with me. And it's a big influence. Even though my work's seemingly all digital, McKean's one of the biggest influence on me artistically. And then later, when I was teaching but wanting to do comics, it was We Three by Quietly and again Morrison. Just in the way that Quietly used space and time. I'd never seen that in panels, and how he used that. And the combination of those two things, I'm always thinking about how to sort of use medium and actually tell elements of a story or in an interesting way where I'm using all facets of time and space.
How very Morrison-y.
I've got one to hand, which is that one.
Ooh.
backwards on the screen, isn't there? It's
Yeah.
Domu, which is Katsuhiro Otomo's Domu, which I think is amazing. And when I'm writing, I usually read the first bit about it. You know, first few pages. There's a thing about this hat with silver wings. I don't know why, but that sets me off when I'm going on to writing. But it's amazing. That's a brilliant book. That and Akira, and yeah, absolutely fantastic stuff.
All right. So are there any panels or scenes from the books we're discussing today, from Invisible Kingdom, from everything, any of your recent work that you are especially proud of, or that you would especially like to call out? Maybe it was extremely challenging to draw. I don't know. Anything come to mind? Any scenes that you especially would like to highlight from your books? I see Christian nodding, so you get to start.
I'm nodding. There's one image, and I wonder if Willow will guess what it is. But there's one image from the first issue. There's a great thing about what Willow does in the scripts for Invisible Kingdom. She gives me 2 splashes, and sometimes more, in every issue, and they're a dream, you know, just to be like, well, I'm going for it. And there's 2 splashes in the first issue, and one's this big intergalactic like light streaming from behind a planet. It's really cosmic, and you know, flares going off and everything. But then you go straight from that into this very quiet panel of our character Vess walking up a kind of wobbly path towards
The
what
staircase.
she thinks is her. Yeah, what she thinks is her thing. And it was the loud boom, and then just very quiet. And it's funny, much as I love doing bombastic and light and color, it was quiet. Sometimes the quiet it's really nice to do, and the contrast between those 2 spreads was I really loved it. In fact, as much as I've loved the whole book, those 2 pages, I don't think I've hit the level that I got on those 2 pages in the rest of the book. For me personally, because they feel really special to me.
I love that scene. I love it when you can pull that off in a book where you have 2 story threads, and at first glance they're quite different, but you sort of by juxtaposing them in that way and tying them together, hopefully with like well-placed, really deep captions that are sort of narrating what's going on, you can show that, oh, these 2 things that seem totally different are actually interrelated in a really interesting way. And yeah, I love it when it works. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it can be a little bit awkward. But when you can pull it off and be like, whoa, we're going here. Oh, no, wait, we're going here. Then, you know, for me as a reader, that's one of the things that could really suck you in. So, you know, as a writer, any time that we can do that, any time that we can pull off that juxtaposition is a good deal.
I know exactly the scenes you are talking about, and I agree.
There's a page in Grafity's wall that I always enjoy looking at. I actually have a print of it back in the other room, and it's the chawl. I don't know that a lot of people know about chawls, but they're a kind of housing structure in India. They aren't quite buildings, and there's like one room houses, just 10 or 12 of them down each corridor, and usually a place where poor people live. But they're so thrumming full of life because there's so many people. I mean, it's India, and there's so many people, and they're all from different cultures and different religions, and they all partake in each other's narratives. So there's this page, which, that one, which is on right now, which just shows you 3 stories of this chawl and the street outside. And in each floor, you can tell there's a different character, there's a different house that has a completely different story. And what one person is doing is kind of leaking into somebody else's house. Somebody's dropping a newspaper, which is falling down the floors. And just really captures the sensation of being in Mumbai, which is having your, not having this sense of like, this space is mine, having to share your space with everyone else. And I think that page really captured it, and it's one of my favorite pages in the book.
Excellent example. Anything you would like to highlight from Steeple or everything? I know it's asking a lot from a complete graphic novel that you've already completed, but
I can come up with something from Steeple. I don't know if one image sticks out. I think I'm a functional artist. Writer artists, you've got to be good at two things. I think I'm a 6.5 as an artist and a 7.5 as a writer, and that averages out at a 7, which is acceptable. That's a pass. But there's an issue that's about Witchfest, which is when witches under the auspices of Witchfest descend on the town of Tredregan. And it's a town-wide festival. It's exactly the kind of arts, you'd have an performing arts festival or something like that. It's a witch festival. But I went to Boscastle Witch Museum in Cornwall, which is one of the greatest museums I've ever been to, and one of the greatest museum experiences of my life, and learned all about witches. And what I learned about witches was it was mostly women who were just completely fine with sex, and burning witches was essentially slut shaming. And once I learned this, and it said so much about the struggle of women through time, that I really felt for the witches. And I could have done 5 issues of witches if I hadn't, gone down to Boscastle when I was writing the 4th issue of the series. So my fondness for the witches, in the end, I did a witch keynote, like the Apple keynotes, where they stand up on stage and reveal the new runes for the new year. And then they hold up the new familiars, and to great applause, one of them holds up and says, "This year, pugs." And the witch holding up the new familiar, which was a pug, was, I think, my favorite panel that I drew that year.
I think that we definitely are going to need to highlight that after this today. So look for that on Dark Horse social media coming soon. Anything stand out that you recall from everything?
There's a panel of a memorial statue wearing a wolf's head mask, $2.50 mask, and a lobster bib, which probably sums up the series better than my my pitch earlier on. Yeah, and I was quite pleased with that. And then a few hours later, I was riddled with self-doubt, so it's fine. But just to balance it out. But
always the way.
Yeah. So if that happened, then it must have been okay. Yeah, that's one of them.
I mean, I like it, so. We do have a question for Christian specifically, but I think it can apply to all the artists too. Folks are curious, what are your coloring influences? They really like your use of color, especially.
That's a weird question. I don't know if yeah. I mean, I don't really have. I mean, there are colorists I really like, but I don't really. Do you know? I think my coloring comes from massive insecurity. There, I've said it, and it's just about I just throw everything at it. So basically, if I'm like really worried about a page, I'll spend longer on it and just paint, and it just build up the color. Mm-hmm. So the more insecure I get, the more beautiful my pages are colored. Basically, it's just because it's just everything. Throw everything at it. Don't look at the lines. Color. That's it. I mean, yeah. There's no real. Other than there are artists that influence how I want to storytell, but there's not any colorists that inspire me. I mean, I would say probably film inspires me more. Like I'll have images of films like the late Blade Runner 2049. Lots of those colors would stick in my mind, and I'd be like, I really want to do something rusty and orange with just highlights of blue here and there. So things like that would be more influential to me rather than a colorist or anything else really.
I gotta say, yeah, Christian, looking at your space vistas, I'm always reminded of like great sort of 90s sci-fi paperback covers and their color choices with the kind of yellows and pinks and blues in there. it just feels like you took that and updated it to now. Yeah.
And psychedelia, you know, just to kind of, I mean, the whole thing with comics, cosmic comics is we all know, you know, space is predominantly black, but then you know, you look at that Hubble kind of like photography and there's all these lush colors flowing, and you know, why not do that? And why not take that and, you know, times it by 100 and really go for it, because comics aren't reality, and that's the blessing of them. You can just go for it. So yeah, that's just what I've always done. I probably spend I mean, literally, I'll spend hours on like cosmic scenes and painting and drawing, and then I always think I should take photographs at the start and then all the way through, because the space scene that I'll start with will look completely different to the one that ends up, and it's just layering it on top of each other. I used to be a fine artist when I was at university. That's kind of what I ended up specialising in, doing matte canvases, and a lot of fine artists will layer up the paint, and you'll often see kind of like, you know, when they do those X-rays of paintings, and you can see what the stages of the painting was, and each of them looks as good as any of them, and it's just those choices that the artist makes. And I think that's what it's like when I'm doing those cosmic things. It'll be building up, but I suppose in my mind it's just like, well, we're getting little fragments of what's left behind, and that's all contributing to whatever the final piece will be.
When you're zoomed in on all that stuff, say when you're really working up close, do you ever get headaches from that? Because I've done cosmic stuff before, and it's migraine afterwards. No. It's a lot to take in when you're doing it, isn't it? As opposed to reading.
I think I could. Right. Yeah. I mean, I suppose in a way, like I tweeted this the other day, like kind of with all the kind of stress and the worries and everything that's going on at the moment, I find it quite therapeutic, because I don't really have to think, you know, I don't have to think about the storytelling at that point. It's all mood and kind of atmosphere. And so I almost, I mean, I wouldn't say I don't look at it, but I'm not really looking at it. Do you know what I mean? I'm just kind of doing it.
Zoned out.
So I kind of just, I zone out. So it's kind of, it's because it's basically, when I'm doing the cosmic stuff, it's just a collection of accidents. So I don't really need to be like, I only really control it at the last moment. So it's just chaos, like the universe is. And then at the end, I'm like, okay, that's the bit I'll keep. I'll move that bit over here, and then I'll do that. You know, so it's very just, you know, very mindful, and just, it's quite nice. Yeah.
Oh, let's see. We are actually nearing our hour mark, and I don't want to keep our UK folks up too late. So let's say we have time for maybe one or two more questions, and I'm going to last call for the giveaway in the chat. If you're in chat, remember, if you've already entered, we've got your entry. If you have not yet, it's just hashtag or # new comics, NEWCOMICS. And you could win one copy of each book we're talking about today. And so one question that's, you know, a little bit more silly, but I think relevant right now, as we all are kind of continuing, at least for now, to social distance, stay home, quarantine, etc. If this were happening in the world of your comic, how do you think the main characters would be passing the time during quarantine? I'm gonna put John on the spot first.
Oh, thank you. Yes, first up, first to the plate. I have thought about this a little bit, because inevitably you have to. And I think of the characters in Steeple, I think Billy, the trainee priest in the Church of England, would have moved every item of furniture into its optimal position in the house. There would have been a lot of reconfiguring of rooms to the dismay of the other inhabitants of the house. Mrs. Clovis, I think, would have concentrated on really, really washing the skirting boards, which is what my mother does in moments of extreme, you know, time stretching out in front of her, like a battleship just rolling away. And then Reverend Penrose, probably, I imagine he'd just be dreaming up schemes for this punching merman. He'd be just thinking about new ways to kind of skewer two at once with a kind of like maneuver. But Really, that's it. And then Maggie, the trainee priestess, she'd just be on her iPad the whole time. She's just slothful.
Sorry,
You know,
sorry, everybody.
She'd be supine. It's all right. Well, it's fine. She'd be supine. And I think that's pretty much it. It would just be lethargic at the Church of Satan. They might have tried to go into hibernation, you know, in some kind of pod. But maybe some kind of incantation to get into November when they figure, you know, there'll be a vaccine. I'm not sure. But anyway, I've covered everybody now. So I hope I've given everybody sufficient thinking time to maneuver themselves into position.
Teamwork.
I love it. Let's see. How about Rom? You look like you might be ready.
Yeah. So, I mean, Grafity's Wall has 4 stories that kind of feature 4 characters. The first of them is Grafity, who's a graffiti artist who is notorious for drawing things and painting things where he isn't supposed to. So I imagine his house is just going to be full of graffiti if he is quarantined there. The second of these characters is Jay, who's a kind of a wannabe rapper. So I can imagine some turntables and some MCing going on at home, neighbors complaining potentially. The fourth of these is Chusma, who's a writer, who's kind of framed on me when I was that age. So probably be sitting at home writing and reading, which is also exactly what I'm doing right now. So, and the last of these characters, she would be watching films because that's her obsession. That chapter actually starts with her enacting a line from a 1983 Bollywood film called Ut. So I think she'd be watching old Bollywood films.
I enjoy all of these answers and thinking about these things. Let's see. How about Ian? What do you think the interesting characters?
The everything store would be shut, so everything would be fine. Rick would be at home just listening to Rush albums. Laurie might quit drinking and take up doing something that wasn't so self-destructive, and then yeah, they'd be all right after a while. Yeah, the shop would be shut.
Superstore.
Yeah, and then that shop would have to compromise with social distancing when it did open.
Yeah,
it might not have quite the effect it would hope for.
An Invisible Kingdom, that might be a bit of a challenge. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, Grix, one of the 2 main characters, would be an essential worker. So she would be out delivering packages and probably grappling with the fact that her very stingy employer would be hoarding the PPE, and she would be worrying about how she could protect her crew. So I think that would have been a completely different story. I mean, it would have led us down a completely different path. And Vess, the other main character, the space nun, you know, I wonder if that would have been, again, a very different story because, you know, she sort of starts out the book quite in an actual cloister, literally cloistered. So I almost wonder if for her and the rest of these nuns, it would almost be like time stood still, like nothing had really changed because they were already looking at the outside world from behind a veil, in a sense, or from behind a screen. So, but they certainly never would have met, which would have been the interesting thing. So yeah, if COVID-19 had struck our little galaxy far, far away, we would have had a very different book.
Indeed. Well, we have drawn a winner in the giveaway, which looks like has been claimed. Congratulations, Robin Henley. You have won a copy of Invisible Kingdom, Volume 2, which is new, and we'll throw in a Volume 1 as well, because you need the beginning. Steeple, Everything, and the new expanded edition of Grafity's Wall. All gorgeous books, including some burger books. Got a little bit of everything in this. Thank you to all of our guests today so much for joining us. We have quite a wide time difference between us, but I really do appreciate everyone making the time to join us for these virtual panels. Since we are still kind of separating and social distancing and conventions aren't happening in person, being able to do these virtual panels is at least one way that we can kind of see and talk to each other and connect with fans as well. So thank you everybody who's been following along with us today and asking your questions. You can find more information on all of these books at darkhorse.com, and they're available now at comic shops and bookstores. Our book distributor in the UK is actually called Turnaround Books. So if retailers are looking for another way to obtain these graphic novels, that's one of our sources for that. So you can find shops near you at indiebound.org if you need another link to listings near you, and comicshoplocator.com for comic shops as well. And I think that wraps up our time. Thank you again so much, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you again to everybody participating in the chat.
Thank you.
It's a lot better than frantically DMing everyone. Thank you.
And so thank you again. The recording of this video will be available here on Twitch for anybody who missed the beginning, wants to watch it again later. And we usually have about a week before the VOD is available on YouTube as well. So we'll announce that on Dark Horse social media. And that brings us to a close for today. Thank you again, all viewers at home, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.